we exist in a post-reach state right now in the United States where we are the most evangelized, we are the most equipped, we are the most educated Christians in the history of Christianity. But we're looking around, we're seeing stats that show us that one of the fastest rising groups in the United States right now, in probably the whole of the West, spiritually, is what we would call the spiritual nuns. Most of my conversations spiritually are actually with more people who are from Asheville, North Carolina, where there's a lot of spirituality, but there's a rejection of dogma, there's a rejection of institution. And so what I think is necessary to see this shift take place in the local church is for us to realize that the way that Stott and Billy Graham and Ralph Winter realized, hey, we have to very strategically, very intentionally, very prayerfully send missionaries around the world. We have to begin addressing our neighborhoods, the people groups here, the worldviews that are represented here, at that same level of intentionality with that same urgency that caused a generation of Christians to get passports and get on planes and go to every corner of the earth.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Develop in the Dark. We are so excited about season 4 of this podcast. Man, we just can't wait to share this content with you. We're going to be talking about evangelism this season. And, in this first episode, we're going to talk about why now. What is happening in the world today that makes us know that this is a critical time to be prepared to share our faith. This whole season, we've invited some special guests along. One of the primary guests will be Jeremy Jenkins. You're going to hear a lot from him. He's a good friend of the podcast, and he leads up a ministry called ATAP, All Things to All People. So we're excited to hear from him. But in this first episode, you're just going to get a flavor for why now and what should we be sharing. It's going to be really exciting as we talk about it in this first episode. So as you're thinking about, and you're watching, we want to ask that you would like the podcast, that you would subscribe even, that you would share, because we feel like this is going to be great content and we want as many people to hear it as possible. So we're looking forward for you joining us this episode, this season of Develop in the Dark. We're so excited. This 4th season of Develop in the Dark, man, what an incredible opportunity this is. I'm just so thankful to be with you guys. And man, we've been doing Develop in the Dark for quite a while now. And there's a heart behind Develop in the Dark, Brad. And we want to share that heart with you.
Yeah, so if you've not leaned into Develop in the Dark before, the background here is when you think about what Jesus did. He grew in wisdom, stature, and favor before God and man. Yep. And for 30 years, he was in absolute hiddenness. And so I believe with all my heart that one of the best things for a Christian, a follower of Jesus to do is not to pursue being out in the public limelight, but rather to develop in the hidden spaces of their life, in the unseen spaces. And so that's what this whole podcast is, in an effort to try to help us as we are in conversations in our home, in conversations with brothers and sisters, to grow in wisdom, stature, and favor in a hidden place. So we're developing in the dark.
That's amazing. And, we've talked about a lot of different things. One of those things, theology. We've talked about spiritual disciplines. This time, we're going to do a collection of episodes on evangelism. Yeah. And we're so thankful for that. And as we think about evangelism, what is evangelism? Why are we wanting to do evangelism? What is the Great Commission all about? So many people don't know what the Great Commission is all about. What are some of the obstacles of our faith? And as we thought about doing this season, we thought about a friend of ours named Jeremy. And Jeremy Jenkins is going to join us for this entire season. We're so thankful for Jeremy and what he brings to the table. And we're just glad to have you, man. There's glad to be here. Yeah, and I just want to give you a little bit of introduction to Jeremy. Jeremy is executive director of All Things, All People. He founded that in, what was it? 2019, right before COVID.
Right before COVID.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And man, tell us a little bit about All Things, All People. And I know your heart there, but share with us just kind of what you're.
Well, so. My passion, really since the time I started ministry, has always been, and really from the time I started ministry was coming across people from different worldviews, from different religions.
Yep.
And it really, the genesis of it was feeling horribly ill-equipped to engage that person with the gospel, or even before I got to that, to even understand what they believe.
Right.
I have a degree in religion, but most of my time was spent talking about one religion, that was Christianity. And I felt like, I didn't understand how, when I was working in the school system, when I was bivocational right out of college, like how the Hindu student sitting across from me, I wanted to engage him with the gospel, wanted to at least just even be a positive influence on his life, but quickly figured out like the way this kid sees the world, the way his family sees the world, the way they interpret truth and morality and goodness and beauty, it's completely different.
Yeah.
And so, just having him read Romans Road or even sharing my testimony of how I met Christ, it had little to no effect on him, because I was sort of just kind of coming from proverbial left field. And so that started me on a journey of my own studies of like, what does the rest of the world think about God? What does the rest of the world think about? And then really where All Things, All People really began to take shape was then really beginning to figure out like, hey, it's not the rest of the world. These people are here, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this kind of stuff, because the reality is like, okay, we've sort of turned a blind eye towards the lostness of our own backyard.
Right.
Wow.
And there's a lot in that has to do with worldview and religious beliefs and philosophies. So All Things, All People started out of that, and it's now taken various forms and shapes over the years, and I've had a lot of great opportunities over the past few years. But ones like this, hanging out with you guys, are some of my favorites. And I love New Spring. New Spring has always been dear to my heart, even before I became buddies with you. And so it's an honor to be here with you.
We're loving it. And elder at your church. You're professor adjunct.
So
all the things.
So I'm one of the lead team pastors. So we have a similar structure to New Spring, really, and on a smaller scale. And so I'm one of the lead team pastors at Element Church in Forest City. I adjunct as much as I can at Gardner-Webb University, which is near me in Bowling Springs, North Carolina. And so I mean, a lot of hats, but they all kind of sync up.
Well, we've really benefited from Jeremy's knowledge and insight. We've had him at our all staff.
Yeah.
He's taught there, and we've got some personal connections too. Man, some inside, baseball. You were, in on a wedding with a friend of ours named Greg, and that's how we kind of really is like, oh, I know this guy, but now I really know him. Yeah,
I was going to say I really leaned into Jeremy fully during 2020 lockdown. And this may have been when a lot of folks kind of discovered you. You're reading up on different things and just trying to grow while you're sitting at the house. And my wife leaning into Phylicia Masonheimer, every woman a theologian. And then she's talking about and lifting up this guy who's helping her think and helping her influence and platform think. And so I'm like, man, I know that name. And then I was like, this is wild. So it's like the worlds colliding and just realizing what you've been doing and how you've been helping folks think of, cleanly about the Bible and about Scripture is just really helpful. And so, that was 5.5 years ago. And then just seeing, man, how close you are, and you've been able to come down and help us train our staff, get our leadership kind of more confidence in, like you said, talking around worldview. I remember just a couple of years ago, John Tyson, a friend of ours, talking about, Manhattan now is not in New York, it's in everywhere.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the reality, because of the internet, because of the way that knowledge and information travel, we've got worldviews that are all over the place. And in our context, more of a rural, southeastern part of America, but people are leaning in and learning from all over. And so we've got to be able to have conversations to engage in these spaces, and Jeremy's been able to help with that. So a little more soft background there.
Now we're going to put all this in show notes and that kind of thing, but Jeremy has provided some amazing resources for us, not only his website, but he's got a great book on how to witness to LDS folks. And as we're recording this right now, his brand new book on Neo-Paganism is coming out. So today. So we're very excited for him, and all this will be in notes that you can get to. So really, really pumped. So here we are thinking about a season of episodes on evangelism. And why talk about this right now? You think about the moment that we're in. What is important about this moment? There's been so many things that we've talked about recently that have been little like prods, like now is the time to really capture this moment. What are some of the things that you're seeing in the earth today that feel like, hey, we need to really push in on this now?
Yeah, well, let's start right now with just the fact that it seems like everybody has come off the back of a mean shift in every kind of statistical way from COVID. There's been an alertness and an awakening happening, and you might call it, as they do in Britain right now, a quiet revival.
Yeah,
and you're seeing people come back around to the things of faith, the things that didn't get shaken during the shaking of 2020, and then all the cultural fallout, and that happened in various ways. It seems like another space you're seeing this is in young men.
Yeah.
I know we've all been intrigued by some of the most recent data that's come out that's saying that young men, for the first time in measured history in America, are more likely to be involved in church than young women. Specifically in Gen Z and below. That's never been the case. In every conversation I've ever had around church attendance and folks that are leading into church, it's always been women leading, percentage-wise. More women are going to church. And now, in those that are younger than us, it seems like it has been a statistical shift. Why is that? It seems like it's good soil happening right now. So in a lot of different spaces, it feels like the winds are blowing in a way that we should pay attention to and make sure the seed of the gospel is getting to that good soil. So those are just a couple of the things that come to my mind, Jeremy.
Yeah. Well, and like multiple times, just even already, we've talked about COVID, and I feel like something happened in 2020 to the collective consciousness of the United States where we began collectively to suffer in a way that maybe our culture hasn't. I mean, there's probably been pockets of time economically. You think about the economy of the 80s or some of the
2008.
Yeah, 2008. Yeah. But then even, culturally, you think about things like the 60s and the 70s. But really, I mean, the last 5 years, I think if you go back in time in the United States, the last time there was this much disturbance and upheaval culturally was probably World War II, or at least Vietnam. And I think what the church has to realize is, like, it can be really discouraging to turn on the news and see, protests in California. It can be really discouraging to see, 2 different wars that, we're at least running tangential to. And then all of the things that are happening on the undercurrent, right? We actually, we're recording this on Juneteenth, which I think you guys have, as New Spring, has done a phenomenal job, I think, leading the way in the evangelical church of like turning our eye towards the suffering of Black Americans. And so there's so many things that I think if I'm not careful, I feel like, I'm ill-equipped to address these cultural questions. But there's a evangelist in the UK named Andy Bannister, and I had the opportunity to have a conversation with him many years ago now. And he said something that when I think about why evangelism, like why really, really lean into that, even if you're not necessarily an evangelist, is he said, when you look at, back then it was a lot of like Black Lives Matter protests, and there was a lot of questions around, the sanctity of life and all these things. And he was like, you know what, there's something in me that gets really excited when I see that, because what those people don't realize, whether they're believers or not, no matter their ethnic background, their political background, those people don't realize they're asking questions that the gospel is the only answer to.
Oh, that's great.
And he's like, so the church should not be angry at those things. The church should actually be glad that we're living in a time that, because of some very unfortunate things, like, I mean, we saw it in COVID. We see it now with political turmoil and things like that, is that the church actually has an opportunity to give the answers that people are asking for. And there's a young guy at my church, Josh was the one who came with me to All Staff. During the middle of COVID, I'll remember it hopefully for the rest of my life, when we were just like a couple weeks into COVID, we were like, what the heck are we going to do, right? He wrote on his marker board in his office, what a time to be the church.
That's amazing.
And that changed everything for us, because we were like, you know what? Like, why evangelize? Why disciple? Because the world is at least our part of the world, right? People in the rest of the world have been suffering, and they've been dealing with political turmoil and war a lot longer than we have. And so Americans, to a certain degree, are just really coming to the table in a lot of ways. But why evangelize? Because the world is asking questions that the gospel is the only answer to. And like when you were talking about young men,
Wow.
we're seeing this huge interest from young men in spirituality. Well, the statistics show us that unfortunately they're not going to the evangelical church, right? Like they're actually going in large droves to Catholicism and Orthodoxy. And it's like, I think we have to ask ourselves questions about why is that? What is it that, how are we communicating? What are we not doing that people are not finding the answers that they're looking for in the message that we're preaching? And so I think the question why evangelize is so loaded with like so many different chapters. But at the end of the day, it's because, I mean, of course we all know, right? Christ commanded it and it's not blind obedience that drives us there. It's like, hey, he had a reason to command that. And ultimately when we see like the cultural upheaval that we're living through right now, we have to know that if we are not at the center of that, proclaiming and preaching the gospel, then we're in the wrong place.
And we're missing an opportunity.
Huge
massive
opportunity.
opportunity.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find interesting about this moment is kind of the paradoxical things that are happening. You hear these stats like all the men are coming back, or, and you're even saying that the soil is ready and all these sorts of things. At the same time, reading stats that just a couple of years ago came out that only 17% of churchgoers understand and know what the Great Commission is.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up as well. We know, what you mentioned just a moment ago, and assume everybody knows that Jesus told us to go.
Yeah, right.
And, the Great Commission. But Trevor, to your point, that statistic is like, unbelievable. So remind us of that, because I think that shocked us.
Yeah.
I remember having a conversation with you, just like, what?
Yeah, we're looking at this data, and I think it was, and I'd have to go back and look at the data. I think it's 2022, 23. But it's a stat that's like of churchgoers who knows what it is and can explain it. And there are other people that have heard of it but can't really articulate it. There's other people who've never heard of it, can't articulate it. But of the people who know what it is and can articulate the Great Commission, 17% of church-going people in the United States. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
Pair that with a stat, Barna stat, that said close to 50% of millennials believe it's a form of religious extremism to share your faith. Yeah. So layer up all this, soil is ready, men are ready to receive the gospel, with the church seems to be, and this is 50% of Christian millennials believe it's a form of religious extremism. You layer all that together and you're like, wow, there's something paradoxical happening. And where we need to really push forward in our effort is making sure that the church is equipped and understands what the gospel is, what kingdom advancement is about, what it's not about, making sure that we can really, in our generation, pick up the baton of sharing the good news of the gospel and moving the Great Commission along in hopes to finish it and complete the Great Commission. We got to do our part to do that. And it's, to me, the giant that's sleeping is the church.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And if internally, we could offer a moment of clarity here, we could offer the correct tools and resources. We can, inspire folks really to step into this to this gap. I think we would be capitalizing on a moment that God has set us up for.
Yeah.
And so here we are. This is the season. This is the moment.
This is why we're here. So as you think about how the church might respond to this and wake up, what is going to be necessary for the church to step into this moment? And I'm thinking about things like, for me, capturing the heart of God. And I think we do a pretty good job of this, but every church in the world is going to say, I think we're doing a pretty good job at this. So what is it then that moves us across the line to say, no, this church, our people, this region, this place, we are actually excited, we're invigorated about sharing the gospel. What is it going to take to wake up the giant? So that's the question for me.
Yeah.
Jeremy, what are you thinking right there?
So, one of the things that, not even just for this conversation, it's been sort of a main motivator for me over the last year or so, because of course we're having these same conversations at my church and all things, all people, and what are we doing? solve that problem. And I think the biggest thing, and I don't want to bypass scripture, because there's so much goodness in scripture of seeing like, hey, God has had a missionary heart since the beginning.
That's right.
Right. When Adam
we're going
and
to talk
Eve
about
fell,
some of
right?
that. Sure.
So I'm going to leave that, right? 'Cause I want to make sure that we don't forsake that. But the biggest thing for me is, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but in the 20th century, there was the Lausanne Conference, which was, essentially this conversation, right? Like the evangelical leaders of that day realized like, hey, something's not happening, but their focus was international. And so you had, think about this room, like in the same room, you had Billy Graham and John Stott, which is those two viewed evangelism and preaching and things like that quite differently, but they both agreed like, hey, the church in the West has to be about sending missionaries. And in the middle of that, actually one of the most consequential things that came out of that conference, that convention, was a guy named Ralph Winter stood up. And Ralph Winter, amongst missiologists, is legendary because he really brought to the table the language of things like unreached people groups and unengaged unreached people groups. And just quickly, for listeners who might not be familiar with missiology, but maybe have heard terms like that, he began to suggest that we should approach international missions from a people group orientated strategy. And what he said was, when we break the world down not by national borders, but by people group borders, we can become more effective missionaries. And he said, and we can really rate the seriousness of the need for missions by looking at, really two things. One is the metric became, they're an unreached people group if they're less than 2% evangelical Christian, and they're an unengaged unreached people group if they're less than 2% evangelical Christian and there's no effective church planting strategy in place. And so that really began to drive really the last 100 years of missions. It's been, that happened within the last 100 years, but really the last 100 years of missions in the West has been just a giant missionary sending vehicle. Now the problem is, and it's not a problem with that, but we have turned a blind eye.
It's a cascading problem.
Yeah, exactly. So we've turned a blind eye. We have sent missionaries everywhere but the shadow of our own steeples. And what's happened is, I call it, and I'm not saying this is doctrine, but I call it, we exist in a post-reached state right now in the United States where we are the most evangelized, we are the most equipped, we are the most educated Christians in the history of Christianity. But we're looking around, we're seeing stats that show us that one of the fastest rising groups in the United States right now, in probably the whole of the West spiritually, is, what we would call the spiritual nuns. When we were coming up in ministry, we thought it was the spiritual landscape and the conversations we were going to have in ministry were with, Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. But it's actually, and Brad, you and I live, or you're from kind of the same area where I live, most of my conversations spiritually are actually with more people who are from Asheville, North Carolina, where there's a lot of spirituality, but there's a rejection of dogma, there's a rejection of institution. And so what I think is necessary to see this shift take place in the local church is for us to realize that the way that Stott and Billy Graham and Ralph Winter realized, hey, we have to very strategically, very intentionally, very prayerfully send missionaries around the world. We have to begin addressing our neighborhoods, the people groups here, the worldviews that are represented here, at that same level of intentionality with that same urgency that caused a generation of Christians to get passports and get on planes and go to every corner of the earth.
Yeah, what you're saying, you threw out Christopher Hitchens and these sorts of folks. I run into that quite a lot, even at Bible study. That people, have this personal Bible study that I'm leading, and people are ramping up to, and want to be prepared to share the gospel with an atheist,
right?
And so they're learning all the things for atheism, but they're sidestepping the everyday conversation with the person that's right across the fence from them or at work with them, they're really not atheistic. They might be believing in God, a kind of a God of their own understanding. They would categorize themselves as a none, which is kind of like a none of the above sort of a situation. Like if I'm filling out a questionnaire and you're asking me what am I, I'm really a none of the above, but I have a spirituality. I have a concept of God, and these are the kinds of folks that that really are around us everywhere.
Yeah.
And it really brings us to the point as we're thinking about folks who are listening to this podcast and are developing in the dark. It's one of those things where you're trying, I think, to communicate that every one of us are sent.
Yes.
We're all sent. And I think, to your point about Lausanne earlier, which was a brilliant thing, and we
they just had their fourth gathering like last year.
South
Korea, I think.
Amazing. To your point there, the missionary movement in all of its iterations has been a beautiful thing. But as we've talked about in previous episodes of Developing the Dark, there are always consequences, downstream consequences to decisions that are made. And so you put all this effort, missionary effort and zeal out, and to some degree, now we have given the responsibility to missionaries who are sent, but I'm okay at home. I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm fine where I'm at.
Yeah.
And that really is, I think, what you're saying there.
I think if we're not careful, we think about that reach status. And I think part of the problem, there's obviously nothing wrong. And not only is there nothing wrong with sending international missionaries, it is our duty.
Sure.
And especially as the most well-funded iteration of the church in history, right? We should have taken the lead in the 20th century, right? Things are beginning to change now, where we're beginning to see the majority of the world, the global South, begin to show us that they don't need us quite as badly as they used to, and our role is changing. But at the end of the day, there was nothing wrong with that, but we rested on our laurels that, well, hey, again, I think about post-World War II, and I think about the baby boomers and, Gen X and things like that, where I think that there was not enough of discipleship of the next generation of Christians. And what we have inherited in the West is a Christianity that largely lacks evangelism.
Or zeal for it.
Especially zeal, but we try and program it. We try and put it on, people, like you said, it's not an every Christian thing. It's, hey, Brad's gifted in evangelism, Clayton, right? Obviously you guys work with him. He's a friend of mine. Clayton's an evangelist. And if we're not careful, we go, okay, well, Clayton's going to evangelize, right? But I'm not going to. And I think part of the problem too is we'll of course spend time talking about this. I think we've largely misunderstood what evangelism is, what it looks like. It's not a one size fits all thing that the way Brad shares his faith is the way that Trev's going to share his faith, that Jeremy or Clayton. And I think largely we've lost that zeal. We've lost the ability, but because we've taken our eyes off the prize of what it means to pass on our faith to generation. And it doesn't happen by accident.
That's right. Well, we're going to spend a good bit of time talking about all those things in this season, and because the Scripture tells us to be prepared, to give a reason for the hope that we have, and so whether that is across the world, if it's across the fence in our backyard, we need to be prepared. Brad, I want to close this first moment out, this first episode. I've heard you talk so many times about ministry camouflage. And when we think about this idea of everyone is sent, what are we looking at right there? We're talking about waking up the sleeping giant of the church, our church even. And I think there's something to this, capturing this idea that I may not be called, to wherever, Turkey or Kenya or wherever, but I am called and I am sent. I've heard you talk about that so many times.
Yeah, well, ministry camouflage, it's an earworm, and it has come back a ton, throughout the years, but it was an idea that I first really, as a young high schooler, saw and got language for watching a dad who is a contractor. He's not a pastor. Yeah. He was a deacon in his local church, and watching a granddad and an uncle who were business owners and thinking they're carrying the kingdom in ways and spaces that, maybe the average person doesn't think they're carrying the kingdom. And then I fast forward 10 years and I'm a youth pastor here at New Spring Church. And I saw specifically our small group leaders that were leading 6th grade dudes or 8th grade dudes. And some of the finest ones in the world were math teachers in high school.
Yeah.
Were, electricians. Where they had these they had these vocational jobs that had them out in the earth, but they were fantastic shepherds and pastors. And this epiphany of ministry camouflage. People think that Pastor Jeremy or Pastor Trevor or Pastor Brad, you're supposed to be out there sharing the gospel. But really what I was blown away by was the fact that in the United States of America, every kid has to go to school up until the age of 15. You can't opt out. And so therefore, if you're a Christ follower and you're a teacher, the Hindu kid has to sit in your class and whether they want to or not, be exposed to the light of the gospel that will not be hidden in your life. Now you're following all the protocols and all the things you're supposed to do, but at the end of the day, your light cannot be hidden. And a ministry camouflage teacher or a coach or a contractor or a police officer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that is the most effective ministry evangelism that can exist in our world. But we've got to recognize that I have to be an everyday Christian. I can't bifurcate my secular and sacred. I've got to live as a distinct, set apart man of God, woman of God, and I'm doing it everywhere. And so helping people realize, put on your ministry camouflage and go and be a part of the onward Christian soldier, army of God, carrying the gospel good news into all of our spaces, places, and neighborhoods. That's the background.
That's it. And it really is, if you think about this idea of waking up, it's our turn. It's our turn. This is the moment for us to rise and to pick up this great commission and see people captivated by this great command. So as we think about this season, we are going to talk about all the different things, but we hope that you're going to be feeling from us just encouraging, and that you can do this, that you can be a part of this, that you can participate in the gospel. And as you listen to these episodes, you're going to come away going, you know what, I am more prepared to share. I'm more prepared to give a reason for the hope that I have. And that's our prayer. That's our hope. We want to see you be effective, and we want to encourage you and inspire you to be able to go out and do what God's commanded us to do.
And just even right there, I'm hearing the words of Christ when he said, it's better that I go to be with the Father so that I might send the helper who will be with you so that little Christ can go all over the world.
That's it.
And so if you're feeling any kind of not me, or I'm not equipped, or I'm not
qualified,
or I'm not got the rhetoric or whatever the things are. No. It was our Lord's heart and plan that he would send common, ordinary men and women.
That's great.
Common and ordinary fishermen, common and ordinary contractors. That's his heart and plan, so that the good news goes around the world. So feel the heart of our Lord. He has planned for you and I to carry his gospel into our worlds. And I mean, that's equipping and encouraging, and that'll stir you up for having a reason for the hope.
I'm telling you what, amazing. Well, that's the time that we have for our first episode of this season of Developing the Dark, and we're going to look forward to continuing this conversation with Jeremy and others throughout this season, and we're just looking forward that you would join us and be a part of this great conversation.